Hi, this is eBuddyNX from the Candid Frame, and welcome to another video. One of the things I wanted to talk about today was the idea of showing relationships or interactions amongst people when we're doing our street photography. If you take a look at a lot of the images that are submitted on the Flickr Group, a lot of them is of singular people by themselves, either walking down the street, on their phones, eating, and people are just sort of isolated. There is no really direct relationship with any other person because these people are just moving through their lives. And it seems like that's the great majority of the images that we see with respect to street photography. But one of the things that I strive to in my own photography is that I'm always trying to look for scenes or moments that reveal how people interact with each other or don't interact with each other in a public space. The nature of a public space is really interesting because people behave a certain way when they're in their offices or when they're at home. And when they get out into the street, something changes. But there are some times when relationships sort of get revealed in a way that most people, might miss unless they're a photographer specifically looking for something interesting to happen in front of the camera. So that's kind of what I want to pursue here, and to suggest to you to sort of start keeping an eye for such moments as a way of making your street photography that much more interesting. We have this picture by Tim Z. It was shot with Ricoh GR at 1/25th of a second at f4 at ISO 280, and they seem to be like on a ferry or something like that. And this mother here is having to wrangle these two kids who are eating what looks like to be a cookie, while this woman next to them is sort of oblivious to all of that while she's on her cell phone. And I just like that this image sort of captures this moment within this family unit. I think that the gesture of the kids and the expressions of the mother and the kids in relationship to her is really kind of interesting. And you get a feel for people in the way that they relate to each other in this shot. I love the contrast of the woman on the right because she's sitting really, really close to these people in a way that typically we avoid in public, but as a result of catching public transportation, we sort of are forced to be in really close proximity to each other, but we're also oblivious to each other at the very same moment. And I think that contrast makes for a very interesting shot. There's a lot of other stuff that's nice here, including the reflection right behind the woman that reveals some of the other people that are on this ferry. And it really works well just as not only a street candid photograph, but also it helps to sort of capture some of the dynamics among people that typically occurs all the time, but which often doesn't end up resulting in the photographs. Here's another image of a woman and a child here walking down the steps. This is made by Lionel Brandt. He shot this at 1/1600th of a second at ISO 100, and I don't see an aperture here. So, again, this shot is all about sort of the gesture for me. The way that the child is negotiating the steps as the mother is stepping down, making sure that the child doesn't fall over. But you have all the typical things we see in a street photograph. We have a street scene. We have a subject here who's largely rendered in silhouette. You have these figures in the upper left-hand corner that serve as a sort of counterpoint. But it's the care that's being exhibited by the mother as she holds the child's hands walking down that makes it a lot more interesting than just someone walking down the steps. Imagine this shot with just a singular person walking down the steps in silhouette. Visually, graphically, it might make for a very interesting shot. But in this shot, it helps to tell a story and reveal relationships. And these kinds of images are harder to get because not only are they more fleeting, but you also have to sort of be looking for them. And sometimes you have to sort of predict when some opportunity will present itself where you'll see that. Like, for example, Lionel may have seen this pair walking down and then realized that there was a potential for a photograph here and sort of waited rather than just walking around and just making snaps. Sometimes when it comes to photographing people in relationship to each other, you kind of see them, and then you get a feeling in your gut that there may be something that's going to happen here that might be really interesting and really elevate the image from just an ordinary snapshot, even an ordinary street photography shot, into something a little more interesting. Here's Barry Lohman. He shot this with the Olympus EM5 at 1/60th of a second at f4 at ISO 320. And he's using what appears to be, is it a telephoto lens? He's using a 45 millimeter, which is about the equivalent of a 90 millimeter lens on that EM5. So he's using a telephoto lens, which a lot of people don't tend to use for street photography, but I think it works really well here because you get to focus on this woman's face and her reaction to this fellow who she's talking to. And there's an engagement that's happening there. Even though we don't get the context of the overall scene, the street, I really like the connection that's happening between these two people. They're obviously in a public area, but we're seeing a level of engagement that I think most people are completely oblivious to when they're walking down the street. We're brought up to think that, we just mind our own business and not really pay attention to anybody else or anything like that. But in street photography, you actually have to go against that. You have to sort of, put your nose in situations where you typically wouldn't introduce yourself, much less a camera. But I think that we have to get past that in order to make really interesting photographs. Now here's a shot by Aaron Mitchell. He shot this with a Fuji X100S at 1,000th of a second, f4.5 at ISO 1600. And I really love this shot because it's a shot that shows the lack of interaction, the lack of relationship with each other. These people here are waiting for a bus, and all of them are in their own worlds. You got 4 people here that are buried in their phones, and then 2 people here are just waiting and gazing and looking for the bus to pass by. And I think this is as telling an image of our times as any as I've seen. I see plenty of pictures, street photographs specifically, that show people on their phones, but it really doesn't say much. This image says a whole lot in terms of what the introduction of these smart devices have done to our lives, and it's as good as any image that tells that story or makes that critique as any image that I've seen. And you need to look more carefully at the world and make really good observations of things like that, but also be really conscious of what you want to do within the frame to sort of express that. It works beautifully, Aaron. You have a lot to be proud of in this shot. And lastly, here's this image by Michael Beecham, and this was shot with a Fuji X100 at 1/500th of a second at f8 at ISO 400. And there's a bit of humor in this shot with a woman in red while she's eating like an ice cream cone. And then you have this couple to the right, which she may or may not be related to. And then just the feeling of the woman on the far left, just feeling like tired, disgusted, I don't know exactly what. And then the person next to her, I assume, is her husband talking to her, and I can't help but feel like she's completely oblivious to what he's saying. And I think there's a little bit of irony with this colorful thing right above them. It looks like it was like a happy birthday thing. I don't think that's exactly what it is, but it may be, because it seems like there was a balloon or something taped up there, or some sort of celebratory thing that was happening here. But it seems like, other than the woman enjoying the ice cream cone, the rest of the people there really don't seem to be taking any pleasure in being there. And I like that contrast. It says a lot about this couple's relationship, and also the kind of a lack of a relationship with the person next to them. They're separated only by a couple of feet, but all of a sudden we're made to think about what the relationship is between these people, what their state of mind, what their emotional state is at this particular moment. It's one of those images that really ask a question, and those are always fun when you see an image and then you start asking questions in terms of what's happening. Who are these people? How do they relate to each other? And I think that that's an interesting thing to try to pursue in our street photography. If you take a look at the images that are in the pool now, you'll discover what I discovered is that I had a difficulty finding images that show relationships. So many of the images are just solo, people just by themselves. And I think as street photographers, we have to take on the challenge of being able to create images that reveal, much more than that reveal how we interact as people, not only with each other, but within a certain community or a certain area in which we're photographing. It's a challenge, but it can produce really satisfying results. Thanks again for joining me. I hope that you're enjoying these videos. And if you haven't joined the Flickr group, please just go to the Candid Frame Flickr group, and I'll be more than glad to add you. And lastly, I want to share that I have released a new ebook called The Candid Frame on Street Photography. It's a short ebook in which I share some of the tips and experiences that have been invaluable to me as a street photographer, and I hope they'll be really helpful to you in your journey on the street with your camera. To get it, it's completely free. All you have to do is go to the Candid Frame website and sign up for our email list, and you'll receive a copy immediately. So check it out when you can. So thanks again for joining me, and if this is the first time you finding us here, know that we also have a podcast called The Candid Frame, which is an interview show in which I feature conversation with some of the world's best emerging and established photographers. And you can find that by going to thecandidframe.com. All right, take care, and thanks for joining me, and I will see you next time.